Did you ever expect that the mythology you were reading as a child would one day take over at least internet story or comic culture as a romantic juggernaut?
No, I think I kind of came into it through like the vein of mythology was like superhero stories before they were superhero stories. I was like, Hercules is super strong. He's just like Spider-Man.
Mm-hmm. They are the ancient superhero stories.
Yeah.
I don't even want to say like they are like they are. And welcome to Tales of Our Times. This is a show where we discuss the stories that move us, what makes them so meaningful, and why others could or should find meaning in them as well. This is not a spoiler-free show, so bear that in mind as you continue to listen. We tackle books, movies, comics, and more. Where there's a story, there's a reason to read. I'm your host, Amanda Stevens, and today I'm doing a slightly different style of Tales of Our Time. In honor of Valentine's Day last week, I wanted to compare and contrast two pretty famous love stories from ancient Greece and kind of compare why one of them has been making a larger splash in pop culture than the other and what might lead to that. So to help me have that discussion and to give the summaries as promised, I invited my Valentine, Jared Friesen.
Hi.
Welcome back on the show.
Thank you.
So there is also another reason why I invited you here is because you are another person I know who has studied literature and dissecting it. And I know that you're familiar with at least one of these myths that we're going to be reviewing.
Yeah, I was a big like mythology nerd growing up. Like I was a little kid always reading like illustrated children's versions of myths and stuff, and then graduating to the more honest translations as I got older. So well, today we're not really looking at superheroes, though. Today I wanted to compare and contrast two stories from ancient Greece. Technically, they're both from ancient Greece. I'll get into the differences when we get there. But those are the stories or the romances of Persephone and Hades as compared to that of Cupid and Psyche. So for the listeners at home, what we're going to do is we're going to give you two summaries of these myths. Jared is going to give the summary of Persephone and Hades, and then I'll summarize Cupid and Psyche, which is mythical, but the most recent retelling of Cupid and Psyche is from like the 1400s, where it was like written down for the first time. Wow.
I know.
Sorry, when you say the 1400s, do you mean 1400 BC or
No.
AD?
Yeah, it's like more of a fairy tale. Isn't that surprising?
Goodness.
But like I said, it was embedded. I believe that's like the first time it was written down by itself. It was embedded in Metamorphosis, which is a much, much older
from Ovid,
work.
Yeah.
Yes. Not Ovid, but like another like Roman guy, which is also why that for that story, Cupid and Psyche, Cupid is, I think that's the Roman name, and Psyche is a Greek name. Because if they were both Greek, then it would be Eros and Psyche, which is sometimes referred to. But anyway, one reason for that is because the original myth was by a Roman guy who was referring to the Greek gods.
With Roman names.
With pseudo-Roman names. It's kind of a mix-up, right? So, so we're already kind of getting into the weeds here. But what I really want to do is kind of start with those stories because some people are really familiar with them, some people are not. So I want to get those summaries out of the way. And the first one we're going to start with is the one that I think has been very popular in recent years. So in the last like decade or so, I've seen a resurgence of this in many different retellings. And that's the story of Persephone, the queen of the dead, and Hades, the king of the dead. So Jared, you're familiar with this myth. Could you give us a summary of Hades and Persephone?
Absolutely. All right. So Hades is probably the third most important god, just behind his younger brothers, Poseidon and then Zeus, who's the king of the sky, and Poseidon, who's the king of the oceans. Hades rules the underworld, which is the land of the dead. It's pretty hard to meet people there. So he goes up and asks his brother Zeus to give him permission to go take Persephone because he has been going around the world and he has seen this young goddess who is the daughter of Demeter, who is the goddess of the harvest and bounty and like nature. He loves her daughter, and so he's asked Zeus to help, like give permission to take her as a bride. Zeus says, okay. Hades goes down and snatches her up. In some tales, it's like he rides out on his like black chariot pulled by black horses, and the earth opens up, and she's taken away and abducted down to the underworld.
She just disappeared, essentially.
Yeah. Closes the door back behind him, the door being the earth, and there in the underworld where he courts her for a period of time, or, depending on the telling, holds her hostage. But during that time, she makes a point not to eat anything until at last he can convince her to have like 6 pomegranate seeds. This is important later when Demeter, Persephone's mother, has gone to Zeus distraught about her missing daughter. In her dismay and like her efforts to find Persephone, she has let her duty, or maybe her wrath in some tellings, fall on the world she's given charge to take care of. Winter comes to Earth for the first time, and people, humans, are starting to freeze and starve because we've never had to harvest. We've never had to save things for when it gets cold.
Really, it like never leaves. I think it's implied that the winter is not 6 months. It's like the long winter because Demeter is holding the Earth hostage for her daughter.
Or it's a much more sympathetic thing too, where it's like, this is just what her bad emotions do to the world. Too.
Perhaps it's just grief, right? So anyway, as you were.
Zeus isn't happy about it because they're not giving burnt offerings to the gods, and Demeter is, again, holding all his worshippers hostage. So he's like, okay, Hades took her.
And then Hades, you have to give her back.
Hades is like, actually, one of the rules of the underworld is if you eat any food that belongs to the dead, you belong to the world of the dead. So they come to an agreement of 6 months of the year, because she ate 6 seeds. For 6 months of the year, Persephone rules as queen of the underworld with Hades, and Demeter mourns her lost daughter, and we have winter. But in the other 6 months, Persephone, the new goddess of spring, returns, and Demeter delights in her daughter, and we get spring and summer and all the nice time on Earth.
And now this has kind of been held up and romanticized. I can't point to exactly why, like, to be honest, but I think in some ways because compared to the other 2 big gods, Zeus and Poseidon, it would seem to be a happy marriage, which we're kind of implying by the fact that neither one of them are known to have cheated on each other.
Which is huge for Greek deities.
Really big.
You can't throw a rock in Greece without hitting one of Zeus's kids.
Yeah, it's pretty true.
I think Poseidon is famous for having like 1,000 sea nymphs as his daughters.
Poseidon has kind of like his own open relationship going, questionably open relationship. He's like married to a giant mermaid-like woman.
Would you say it's fluid?
Oh, I would, I guess, but not happily. So anyway, so it's kind of like implied to be a happy marriage. People tend to assume that. And so we'll get into like what makes that so popular, what we think makes that so popular. But as a point of comparison, I would like to offer up the story of Cupid and Psyche, or Eros and Psyche, or however we're going to go about it, which I think has a happier ending. So I'm going to jump into that summary right now. So there are a bunch of different versions, but I'm going to give like the Spark Notes version of it. So once upon a time, there was a girl named Psyche, and she was the hottest thing on earth. And people started saying that, which made Aphrodite, the goddess of love and beauty and not unofficially jealousy, really upset. So she sent her son, Cupid, whose job it is to make everybody fall in love with each other, to make Psyche fall in love with the ugliest creature on earth. And so Cupid goes to go do that, and right as he's knocking his arrow to make Psyche fall in love with something terrible like a frog or a pig, he accidentally pokes himself, and he falls hopelessly in love with Psyche. So now he can't bear to do this to her, so he does what he thinks is the next best thing, and like essentially Greek wedding vows, he kidnaps her. He enlists the help of the wind, and he kidnaps her up to this like hidden place, which I've always understood to be basically like a castle in the sky. And it's pretty great for her. She gets like all of her needs met. Like there are feasts every night, and she has music played for her, and it's beautiful. And she's mostly isolated except for this strange, loving figure who comes to visit her every night, and they do what married couples do. And she finds herself in love with him. But Keely Cupid does not reveal his face, and he never says who he is because he doesn't want her to know. And there are different reasons given this. Maybe he's afraid of his mother's wrath, or he wants her to love him for who he is. Either way, eventually Psyche gets lonely, so she begs him for her sisters to visit. He finally relents. They do, and they ultimately convince her that she has to break his trust and figure out who he is and break his one rule, because maybe he's a psycho or maybe they're jealous. So that night, after they've left, they do their deed, and she pulls out like a lamp. And she doesn't see a monster. She sees like a beautiful deity. And in shock, she drips some of the hot oil on him, which obviously wakes him up. And he is devastated. His heart is broken because he's like, I literally gave you one rule. You broke my one rule. And he leaves her. And she can't convince him to come back. And now she's devastated. And she's thinking about killing herself. But she's like, well, first I'm going to ask Aphrodite for her help. And Aphrodite is like, yay, I finally get to enact my revenge on you. I hate you. And you broke my son's heart. She's the worst in this story. And so she basically gives Psyche 3 impossible tasks. Meant to punish her or make her give up, because I think there's an ultimatum, if I remember, where she's like, if you fail, you die. Haha. Or he's never coming back to you. It's something like that.
Dang.
And she gets supernatural help with each of these tasks. And in some versions, it's that Cupid is watching her, and even though he's heartbroken, he doesn't want her to fail. And in other versions, it's that like she's just so lovely or something else, like the world takes pity on her, and they're like, wow, this is sad, huh? And it culminates in her, Aphrodite, telling Psyche to go down into the underworld to get Persephone's beauty box. So with some more help, she makes it down into the underworld just fine. And Persephone is essentially like, here, yeah, great, take it. Just don't open it up. So once she gets to the top with the beauty box, she's about to give it away to Aphrodite. And she is like racked with curiosity and basically the idea of like, if I put on Persephone's beauty secrets, will Cupid love me again? She opens the box and Persephone's secret is death. So the sleep of death falls upon her. And seeing this, Cupid is like overcome with guilt and basically realizes like, it's not that big of a deal that you saw me. So he flies down, and it's described poetically as like he pulls or brushes the sleep from her face and puts it back into the box. So she wasn't permanently dead. He gives the box to his mom, and he goes to Zeus and is basically like, hey, we want to get officially married. In some versions, he cuts a deal with Zeus where he's like, okay, fine, I'll help you with like your gross things. People will love you. But I want to get married to this girl. And I want everyone to see that it's like an official thing and recognize us as equals so that I don't have to hide her anymore. And then Aphrodite's told she has to back off and just live with it. And they live happily ever after as like two, not psychopomps, but like visions of love. They go around and they have a child who is pleasure. And then that's the story of Cupid and Psyche. So now that you've heard both of them, I kind of wanted to ask you then, what do you think has led to the popularity of Persephone and Hades that is maybe missing from Cupid and Psyche?
I think this is a great question to dig into. I remember hearing like the Eros and Psyche one like way long ago. And hearing it retold now too, I'm kind of a little bit like influenced now by what you said, that it came out in the 1400s.
That was the first written version.
The first written version is like, it feels, doesn't it, very fairy tale-ish almost. Like there's bits of Bluebeard, Rumpelstiltskin, angry stepmothers. It's like a lot of those tropes that are there. And I think maybe why like Persephone and Hades have had a more interesting love story is like they kind of buck the trend. There is the rocky initial like
the Greek hello, which is
Greek hello,
a kidnapping.
Like that's honestly, I believe that's like, that was just maybe par for the course in some like corners of like Greek societies. Like the king would say, you may take this wife, man. And
then she gets taken,
she
and then
literally gets
everyone's
taken.
like, wow, congrats.
Yeah.
This is great for you both.
What a fast chariot.
Oh, God.
But other than that, though, like they're just a rock steady couple.
Do you think it's actually maybe the lack of context that makes Persephone and Hades a much more popular story today because there's more room to play around in it?
I think precisely, yes, that like Hades doesn't get a lot of big outings in myths from what I really like.
It's usually people visiting him.
Yeah, usually people visiting him, and no one wants to stick around and like get inside his head or anything. Or also Persephone is like the softening influence there too.
That's a good point. Hades is kind of in my understanding of the myth, just like a blank slate of a character. Like people are always, like heroes are always kind of walking in and out of his realm trying to get people out. And it never works successfully, which is maybe why he's kind of a blank slate. It's ironic, I think you say Persephone is the softening influence on these stories, because I don't think that was true of people who worshipped them. But it is interesting in a family, the Greek family, of relationships that we can critique. Perhaps we're just gravitating towards the one with the least drama.
Yeah. I think also this myth can be so bare bones, is that like at some point Persephone in the story has to leave our world, go to the underworld, and through like her choice or being tricked, has to stay there for a portion of time. Because it's a myth. It's explaining a facet of the world, why we have winter and spring.
Yeah, yeah.
So like,
it's not meant to be a love story.
Yeah, it's not meant to be. But like, as long as you hit those notes, the story is basically yours to do with what you will. And so I think that's like, it's got that flexibility. Also, like maybe the darker edge of it too, of like spring and death falling in love, as opposed to like, and then the hottest woman on earth, Psyche, fell in love with the hottest god. And it was like...
Yeah.
It's like,
it's a little bit unattainable.
Yeah, but it's like, it's also a little bit expected too. It's like, well, yeah.
Obviously.
Yeah.
Did we really have to trip and prick ourselves with the arrows that make us fall in love, or is that just a convenient excuse?
And then like, to wit with like the 1400s aspect, like reading that Renaissance tendency to maybe use this as allegory.
It was what I double checked my sources for this, and basically like the article that I was reading this from essentially said it was then immediately used as allegory. Like,
yeah. Your mind, your psyche, your sense of self or whatever, and love generates pleasure.
Right.
It's like, man, what
could it mean? Yeah.
Whereas like, it's a much more poetic story. There's a lot more like metaphor with like, you could portray him as a very lonely figure in Hades, sitting in the cold world with only the dead to keep him company forever.
And his monster dog.
And his monster dog, who he named Spot.
Cerberus is Spot in Greek.
This guy is like, I'm feeling a little lonely. And he might not even been noticed by her too, because his magic item
is the Hat of Darkness and invisibility.
And so he can visit the world. And like, so like, there's a softer version of this myth where he just meets Persephone and maybe slowly wins her affections through like invisibly talking to her and like making her acquaintance, or like meeting her in secret. You could play this in a very romantic way too.
Yeah.
The obvious problems too of like abducting a person.
Yeah. I mean, to be fair, they both start that way.
Yeah.
So I don't think like I guess the comparison is that seems like the way that Greek gods met people. It's not really a point of contrast, I suppose. Although I guess what you could say, what is contrasting is that in everything that I've seen, it's implied that like when Cupid takes Psyche, he is taking her from a bad situation. And one of them, like they were trying to figure out why Psyche hadn't gotten married yet. And they literally hold like a funeral for her, and he like picks her up from that. And then Persephone is just kind of like doing her business.
She's gardening.
Yeah, and then she gets, and then the door to hell opens up and swallows her inside. And he's like, congratulations, we're married now. So, well, unfortunately, that's all the time we have for today. I don't have a nice bow in terms of like, do you have a subtitle for this? But I guess, would you recommend either of these stories as a romantic read for someone?
I would say the two veins you could look for. If you're looking for a love that grows and like finds itself, go to Persephone and Hades for that.
Hades.
Yeah, Hades for that. And if you want a love conquers all, stick with Cupid and Psyche.
But be careful about which version you read. Sometimes they get really violent.
But yeah, take your pick though.
Okay. Well, anyway, Jared, thanks for coming here to help me share two ancient stories of love. I don't hope they've inspired you.
I don't want them to.
This has been Tales of Our Time on Radio Taiwan International. I was your host, Amanda Stevens, with my guest, Jared Friesen. Whether or not you celebrate Valentine's Day, I hope that you enjoyed listening to 2 more ancient love stories. Let me know what you think, and I'll see you next time.